Their map redrew itself every time they blinked. The first night in the woods had been quiet, almost oppressively so. Rowan, Mina, and Ellis set up camp in a clearing where the trees curved inward like cathedral arches, their knotted limbs scratching against the sky. A thin mist hovered near the ground, brushing ankles with the damp chill of early autumn. They hadn't noticed anything unusual at first, just the ordinary creaks of old trees settling, the occasional snap of a twig under unseen feet. Mina unfolded the map she had found in a dusty trailhead cabin. Its paper was thicker than ordinary, with a faint iridescent sheen. At first glance, it appeared to chart the surrounding forest in painstaking detail. Paths, streams, rocky outcroppings. But when Rowan leaned in to get a closer look, the lines seemed to twitch like the surface of water. "You're imagining it," Rowan said. "No," Mina insisted, her voice tight. "Look at this." She blinked, and the map shifted. The familiar trail they had followed vanished, replaced by a looping path that led deeper into shadow. Trees that had once been marked as distant landmarks had moved, converging near a symbol she didn't recognize. A black circle surrounded by jagged scratches. Ellis frowned. "It's redrawing itself. Every time we blink." Mina's hands shook slightly as she held the map up again. True enough. As her eyes closed and reopened, the lines reshaped themselves, as if the forest itself were whispering through ink. The streams curved in impossible angles, the paths doubled back in circular loops, and the symbols multiplied, their meanings incomprehensible. "We should just ignore it," Rowan said, trying to sound calm, but even his voice betrayed unease. "Stick to the trail we know." But the forest did not like being ignored. That night, the shadows between the trees thickened unnaturally. Every rustle, every sigh of the wind seemed to come from just behind them. Yet no matter how they turned, the source was nowhere to be found. The mist crept closer, curling around their legs like icy fingers. Rowan swore he saw shapes moving in the fog. Long, thin limbs that bent at wrong angles, faces that appeared for a heartbeat and then melted into bark and moss. By morning, they realized the forest had changed overnight. The trail they had followed yesterday was gone. Fallen trees now blocked what had been an open path. Even more disconcerting, the map in Mina's hands no longer resembled anything recognizable. A new labyrinthine network of markings had appeared, converging toward a single point deep in the forest. A small, jagged symbol pulsed faintly, almost like it was alive. "I don't like this," Ellis whispered. "It's directing us somewhere." "Where?" Rowan asked, though he already feared the answer. No one spoke. The air itself felt charged, tense, as if the trees were holding their breath. As they followed the map, the forest seemed to respond. Roots shifted subtly underfoot. Fallen leaves rearranged themselves into patterns of footprints that didn't match their own, and branches snapped in warning, just out of reach. Every time they blinked, the route twisted again, leading them in circles they couldn't quite perceive until they had already stepped into them. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time in this place was slippery, as though the forest devoured it in fragments. Shadows lengthened, shrank, and bled into one another. The sky remained a pale, featureless gray, refusing any hint of sun or moon. The map guided them relentlessly, coaxing them forward with an invisible patience. By the third day, their sense of direction had dissolved entirely. Every landmark felt familiar yet alien. A stream that had curved north yesterday now ran east, its water cold and metallic on the tongue. Rocks that had been smooth yesterday now bore deep carvings. Spirals, concentric lines, symbols that seemed to hum when stared at too long. The map had taken on a sinister animation of its own, its lines now almost breathing. Every blink was a betrayal, routes reformed, landmarks shifted, and the black circle, the destination, grew larger, more insistent. Mina began to notice a sound beneath the normal forest noises. A low, rhythmic scraping, like claws on stone. It came from the direction the map suggested. Rowan heard it too, felt it more as a vibration through the soil than as a sound. Ellis refused to acknowledge it, muttering about hallucinations, but even he flinched when a branch snapped unnaturally close. That night, they tried to make camp again, but the map would not allow them rest. Each blink revealed new paths forming, routes that curved back toward the same black circle, now glowing faintly in the mist. Mina thought she saw faint figures along the way, tall, emaciated shapes with featureless faces, that vanished when she focused. They were not quite human. They did not move like animals. The forest seemed to cradle them, guide them, almost test them. Sleep came in fits, dreamlike. Rowan dreamed of falling through the canopy, of the forest folding in on itself like paper. Mina dreamed of the map consuming itself, devouring the forest, turning the trees into ink and shadow. Ellis dreamed of voices whispering from the roots, counting in a language he almost understood. When they awoke, none could say whether hours or days had passed. By the fourth day, exhaustion began to warp their minds. The map now resisted being touched, floating just above Mina's palms. Its ink shifted with malevolent intelligence. Each blink brought the black circle closer, though the terrain underfoot seemed to elongate, stretch, and loop back on itself. They could no longer remember where the forest had begun, only the relentless pull of the map and the subtle feeling of being observed. The scraping noise intensified, now accompanied by a faint chanting. Words in a forgotten tongue slipped through the mist, brushing against their consciousness. Rowan tried to shout, but his voice returned in distorted echoes. Mina tried to tear the map, but it resisted, folding impossibly into itself, then unfurling again with the black circle pulsing like a heartbeat. Finally, they arrived at a clearing unlike any other. The mist here swirled around a ring of standing stones, blackened with age. The circle in the map now matched the stones perfectly. In the center lay a shallow pit, surrounded by carvings that pulsed faintly as if alive. They felt drawn forward by a compulsion beyond fear, a magnetic tug in their bones. The air smelled of wet earth, decay, and something sweeter, older, like the scent of ancient rituals. The shapes appeared again at the perimeter of the clearing, taller now, impossibly thin, their featureless faces tilting in unison toward the circle. The forest itself seemed to lean in, waiting, patient. Rowan tried to resist, to pull Mina and Ellis back, but their legs moved as if under a spell. Mina held the map above the pit. Its lines twisted violently, forming a vortex that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the chanting. When she blinked, the map transformed again. But this time, the circle opened like a doorway, a hollow black maw inviting them in. The forest shivered in anticipation. Ellis whispered, "It's not a map. It's a key." Rowan wanted to argue, but words failed. The shapes pressed closer, the chanting now a roaring tide that seemed to fill their minds. The map throbbed in Mina's hands, and she realized, with a sinking understanding, that it had never been guiding them to safety or home. It had been guiding them to the forest itself, to something ancient, ritualistic, and hungry. When Mina blinked, the forest blinked back, and they stepped forward. Directions that led nowhere. The first evening, the forest seemed only slightly alive, more a quiet observer than a threat. Rowan, Lila, and Marcus set up camp in a glade ringed with ancient oaks, their gnarled limbs twisting overhead like arthritic fingers. Mist clung to the forest floor, curling around moss-covered roots and rocks, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Even the wind was hushed, as though the woods held its breath in anticipation. It began after dark, when they had finished eating and the fire had dwindled to a faint orange glow. "I hear something," Lila murmured, frowning at the shadows beyond the ring of firelight. "What?" Marcus asked, though the question sounded hollow in the thick silence. "A voice," she said, soft, distant, giving directions, like it knows this forest better than we do. Rowan laughed nervously. "Voices in the woods? That's just your imagination." But the voice did not belong to imagination. It was low and ancient, syllables rolling and folding in on themselves in a way that no human tongue could replicate. It spoke their names and whispered instructions, precise yet cryptic, left at the twin stones, past the hollow root, under the leaning pine. They glanced at the map. The paths it charted were familiar, drawn from the ranger trail markers and satellite data. Yet the voice's directions diverged at every turn. When they attempted to follow it, the forest shifted. Stones moved, roots rose where none had been, and the leaning pine, if there ever was one, reappeared miles from where they thought it should be. Lila shivered, clutching the map. It's not on the map. Nothing it's telling us exists. Marcus frowned. We're just lost. That's all. It's probably echoes of the trail, distorted by the wind or the trees. But the forest was no passive landscape. Every step they took seemed preordained, guided by the whisper. The ground undulated beneath their feet, soft humus giving way to hidden depressions, then hard-packed soil where there should have been roots. The trees shifted imperceptibly when they weren't looking, their trunks bending, rearranging, as if the forest itself was testing them. By the second night, exhaustion had warped their perception. The voice returned, now closer, almost coaxing. Turn, follow, listen. Rowan could feel it under his skin. The sound seemed to radiate through the soil, threading between the trees, vibrating against the bones of their feet. No matter how carefully they tried to measure distance or follow bearings, every landmark contradicted the last. A stone that had been beside a stream yesterday now rose from a mound of moss miles away. Branches stretched to block paths that had been clear moments before. They began to notice a subtle accompaniment to the whispers. Faint echoes of movement, brushing at their periphery. Footsteps, rustling leaves, the creak of limbs where no tree stood. It was as if unseen watchers measured each hesitation, each misstep, and reshaped the forest in response. We're not going in circles, Lila said, her voice trembling. We're spiraling. Something's testing us. Marcus said nothing. He held the map flat, staring at the network of trails, streams, and symbols. Yet the voice's directions never matched. Each instruction led them over ground they knew, then through terrain that seemed to fold impossibly upon itself. They would step into a clearing, and the same clearing would exist elsewhere. Subtly different, trees rotated, shadows skewed, moss patterns shifted. The third day brought hallucinations that seemed indistinguishable from reality. Rowan swore he glimpsed figures behind the trees, tall and thin, moving silently, then melting into the bark when he blinked. Lila heard murmurs echoing the voice, low and repetitive, in a language just beyond comprehension. Marcus began to forget small things, the color of a leaf, the position of a rock, even where the path had started. The voice remained patient, persistent, almost ritualistic. Over the ridge, through the hollowed oak, toward the light that isn't. They followed. The forest seemed to bend around them. Hills stretched unnaturally. Roots rose like barricades, and shadows elongated in ways their minds could not reconcile. Distances became impossible. A tree glimpsed at the edge of vision would loom enormous when approached, then shrink when passed, as though mocking their perception. The map grew useless. No compass, no stars, no landmarks could reconcile the terrain. At night, the whispers returned in a chorus. The trees themselves seemed to hum, their sap pulsing in rhythm with the voice. When they tried to speak, their words echoed oddly, returning slower or faster, sometimes distorted beyond recognition. Sleep offered no relief. Dreams mirrored the forest, folding paths over themselves, showing them arriving in places that were already behind them, or already gone. By the fourth day, the trio's minds frayed. Lila began to talk to the voice as if it were a companion, asking for guidance, begging for clarity. Rowan tried to argue against following it, but his legs moved with a will not entirely his own. Marcus refused to speak at all, eyes wide, tracking the subtle movements of the forest like prey. Then came the clearing. It was not on any map. No trail, no coordinates, no natural landmark could have predicted it. A circle of jagged stones rose from the ground, arranged with geometric precision that made their heads spin. The soil was darker, as if absorbing light, and the air carried the scent of damp earth mixed with something older, metallic, almost like blood long dried. The voice spoke louder now, commanding, jubilant, its cadence ritualistic and hypnotic. Step inside, join the order, become the path. Figures appeared, flickering at the edges of their vision, impossibly thin, with faces obscured by shadows, as if the forest had sculpted them from mist and bark. They did not move like humans, but their attention was fixed on the trio, waiting. Rowan tried to stop, to pull back, but the terrain betrayed him. The clearing stretched out, a funnel pulling them forward. Lila and Marcus moved too, compelled, drawn by the rhythm of the voice and the impossibility of escape. The map, left behind in their scramble, had altered of its own accord. Trails converged toward the circle in impossible ways, lines bending like liquid ink. The blackened soil of the clearing mirrored the map, the same jagged geometry etched invisibly into the world. The forest seemed to breathe, a living entity pressing down on their shoulders, whispering secrets they could almost understand but never fully grasp. They realized, too late, that the voice had never been offering directions to safety. It had been offering instructions to a ritual older than the land itself, to a place outside of space and memory, where paths exist only to fold back upon themselves. The forest was not a forest, it was a test, a labyrinth, a sentient mechanism. The clearing, the stones, the figures, even the whispers. They were all part of it, eternal and patient, waiting for travelers foolish enough to follow directions that led nowhere. Rowan, Lila, and Marcus stepped into the center. The forest exhaled. The world tilted, and the voice whispered once more, "Home is here. Nowhere is yours." The mist swallowed them,